Hello, welcome to White Davy Gardening and Worm Farm. Today we are going to be discussing worm farming, how we harvest our castings, and how we go about separating our cocoons from the castings if we do so. Please feel free, please feel free to share how you harvest your casting, what method you use, and whether or not you separate your castings, your cocoons from the castings, etc. Hi, I'm White. How are you? So, welcome everyone to the live. How we harvest our casting is a personal choice. There are so many different methods that can be used. Hi, LP. Yes, there are many different methods that can be used to harvest castings, and there are a combination of methods that can be used to harvest castings. So, please feel free to share how you harvest your castings. Okay, you're doing well. I'm doing well as well. Oh, I'm doing well too. Yeah, seems as if I'm going to be having a bit more tongue twisters today. Yes, I'm doing okay. So let's see. LP says, "I'm white. Watched a few videos earlier but couldn't comment. Chickpea meatballs look good, even as I'm a vegetarian. Even as I'm not a vegetarian." Yeah. So some use their casting as is. Some sift their castings. So whether it is by just simply removing the castings or using the worm as is, everyone have different methods of how they harvest the castings. So that's what we're going to be discussing today. That's done popping up here. Okay. Sorry about that. I don't know why all sorts of screen intend to pop up on my computer now. Yes, so oh hi mom. Hi AJ. How are you guys doing? So what method do you use to harvest your castings? See, Han White says, "Thank you, Helpy. Why couldn't you comment? Was there an issue?" Okay, you're stopping by for a few minutes, AJ. No worries. Thanks for the few minutes that you're spending with us. Yes, so for me, harvesting my casting, there is no one method that I use. I like to use a combination of methods because I find it to be a lot easier than just doing one method because then I can get more worms out of the castings as opposed to just a few. LP says, "Oh no, sorry, I was watching on my TV, but I'll go back later and comment." Okay. Yeah, so for me, I use a combination of method. The first step that I use when I'm harvesting my casting is to use the bait method so that I can get out as many worms as I can. Of course, you know that when you use that method, a lot of the worms are going to stay behind if there is still material left in the casting that has not been processed yet. So I use the bait method either by sticking a container of food in the middle of the worm bin, or sometimes I try to use the bait method using horizontal migration. But yes, so the bait method is the first step that I take. Hi, Russell. I use light method and hand pick cocoons. I use double screen machine. It catches most cocoons. Okay. One that falls through screen gets hand pick and go with the castings. Or go with the castings. I do both weekly. Oh, that's a lot of work. Every week you're doing that. You must got a lot of worms to have to be able to harvest on a weekly basis. But that's good. That's quite good. Hopefully someday I will get to be at that stage. My thoughts on Canadian Nightcrawler, AJ. I would really love to raise them, especially since I'm in Canada. But I find that when I was raising them, they do well in the winter, but then when it comes down to the summer, not so well because they don't like the heat. So for that reason, they don't do well unless, of course, you have some method of keeping their bin cool. And the methods that I can use to keep their bin cool is too expensive. So and too much work because you're either going to have to be consistently adding ice pack to their bin, or you keep a cooling fan or something on them, or you keep them in an environment where you have an AC where you can lower the temperature to their liking, which is not necessarily to our liking as humans. So yeah, so for that reason, because they constantly require cool temperature, then I don't bother to raise them. If I had the time, I would raise them like during the winter and then release them every year in the summer because they are Canadian night crawlers, so they can survive here outdoors because they can find wherever the cool shade is. But to have them in a bin is quite a challenge. And then some recommend keeping them in the fridge. But then when you have them in the fridge, the temperature is so low, they will slow down drastically. So and how many, depending on how many of them you're going to be raising, you don't necessarily have all of that space to keep them in a fridge. So to me, it's not really worth the effort unless, of course, you have the means to keep them cool and don't mind the expense. Let's see. Okay, Rosalie saying hi to everyone in the live. You're welcome, AJ. Yes. So, as I was saying, using the bait method is my first step. And then, where possible, like for now, when it is warm outside, then I will use the light method by putting the castings out in the sun and then just take off the material on the top each time the worms keep moving away from the light. And then, after doing that, then I would sift the castings and then usually the worms would fall out in the container that catches unfinished or unprocessed material. Yes, and then after doing that, the next step for me is to underpick whatever worms fall into the castings. Okay, mommy's saying hi to Russell. Okay, so do you guys sift your castings? Because I know not all worm farmers actually sift their castings. So do you sift your castings? Or do you just bake the worms out and use the castings as is? And for me, I definitely love to sift my casting. I like the whole process of it. It actually is fun, but I sifted my castings for more than one reason. Okay, you sift yours and white. Good. Yes, I sift mine for more than one reason. Castings sometimes can contain undesirables such as pebbles. It can have little pieces of plastic or little pieces of sticks or you name it. So it can have a lot of undesirables in there. So that is one of the reasons why I sift my castings. And then, especially if you're going to be feeding your worms dried leaves that you rake from your yard, or if you're going to be collecting food scraps or compost or dried leaves from neighbors and friends, then sometimes you can find where they will have a piece of plastic or some undesirables that come along with it. So for that reason, I sift my castings. And then some fruits will come with little stickers on them, and sometimes you take off the stickers, sometimes you can't, you don't have the time to take off all the stickers on it, And then these stickers have little glues on them. Sometimes even the cardboard that we use, some section of it might have glue on them as well. And the plastic, these labels that comes on the fruits have plastic on them. And some papers will have a thin layer of plastic. So those things are going to end up in your casting. So for those reasons, I sift my castings. And then also, I just like to see the refined castings. So to have it nice and refined and to control how much of my worms I'm actually putting back in the garden. Then I sift. And then if you're going to be selling your castings, then you want to have a nice uniform look to your castings. So that's another good reason for sifting it. Let's see, Russell says, granddaddies, okay, the Canadian Nightcrawlers, granddaddies. I can remember using frozen bottles of ice and cold packs in a pitch, I think. Otherwise, in bed, water cooling or keeping them throughout the summer months. Yes, it is a lot of work to raise those Canadian night crawlers. Okay, AJ, you said you have to leave. Keep up the good work with your channel. Have a great weekend, everyone. Same to you, AJ. Thanks for dropping by. Let's see. LP says, I have harvested by removing half of the material, half new to that, then waiting 2 weeks to remove the other half. Okay. I have done some baiting, but usually hand picking worms from buckets full of castings. Okay. I do not sift, but I'm interested in it. Okay, cool. Okay, so everyone is saying bye and have a lovely weekend to AJ. Okay. Yes. What size, for those of you who sift your casting, what size screen do you use? The mesh that you use to screen your casting. What size do you use? Do you use 1/4 inch, 1/8 inch, or half inch? Because I've seen quite a lot of videos on YouTube where some worm farmers use half-inch screen, some use 1/4 inch, but it seems as if the most popular is 1/4 inch for some. For me, I use the 1/8 screen because it allows me to control the amount of unprocessed material that is going to end up in the finished castings. And then just having that nice refined look that you get when you use 1/8 of a screen. So for that reason, I love to use the 1/8 screen. Also, if you're going to be selling your castings, I know that for here in Canada, there is a restriction or a limit on the size of material that can be found in your worm castings. So they don't allow you to have any material in your worm casting that is 1/4 inch or above. So for that reason, using 1/8 is also another ideal reason. I don't know if that's the rule everywhere, but for Canada, if there is anything in your worm casting that is not processed, then it cannot be 1/4 inch or over. But when you use the 1/8 of an inch, it is easy to control the amount of worms that escape into the castings, the amount of cocoons that gets into the castings, and the amount of unprocessed material that falls into the castings. Okay, so Russell said he uses 1/4 inch for worms and he uses 1/8 for the cocoons. Okay, nice. Excuse me. Okay, I think I miss Anwai's comment. I do not know the one you gave me. I do wish it was smaller. The one I gave you is a 1/8 of an inch mesh. Yeah. I wish mine was smaller too, so I'm going to be doing a double system to try and control the size of that for my cocoons because I find that cocoons do tend to fall through the 1/4 inch mesh. So I'm going to be using the not the 1/4 inch through the 1/8 mesh. So I'm going to be doubling up the 1/8 mesh in order to control the cocoons. Let's see, Russell says the bigger the worms, the larger the cocoons. Yes, that is true. I haven't noticed that. Well, for now, I'm only sifting red regular casting, so I only need the fine mesh. Later on, when I'm raising or harvesting the Nightcrawler cocoons, then I might need a bigger mesh. I don't know. We'll see. Yes, so I like to use the 1/8. Oh, or my ENCs, they're doing well, I think. I know the ones outdoors, they definitely are doing okay. The one indoors, I am not sure yet because I haven't really looked at them in a while. I just had food to the bin and some bedding, and that's it. So I haven't checked on them really to see how they are doing. They were among those worms that were escaping from the bin. And when I look at the bin, I realized that they had composted all of the material that is in there. But because I usually feed them so much food more than they can manage, so sometimes I don't check on the bin as often as I should. Sometimes I'll allow a month to pass, even 2 months to pass without checking on the bin because they usually have more food than they can manage. So, because of that, they were among the worms that were escaping from the bin the other day because they had processed all the food that was in there. And the bin was quite a bit wet because they are being fed a lot of food scraps that contains a lot of moisture. So, I added tons of bedding to it and a reasonable amount of food. So, I assume that they're doing okay. I haven't seen any more crawling out since then. So, I think they're fine. I still haven't taken my worms, my Canadian, oh, not Canadian, those ENCs that are outdoors. I still haven't taken them in yet. I think they're going to be the last set of my worms that I actually bring indoors because the container with them, I can always just lift it and bring it inside. But then for the rest of bins, I haven't sorted them out yet. See, I have 5 outdoor bins, which are stationary. So I've harvested 2 of them so far, and the other 3 I haven't touched yet. So that's what I've been working on in the last 2 weeks or so. Hopefully, I can get it done in the next 2 weeks because it seems as if the weather will be fair enough for them to be out for the next 2 weeks because the lowest temperature overnight will be 10 if it remain as they say it will be on the weather network. Yes, so still have those to move indoors. Let's see. And says that's good. Russell says separating the cocoons from the worms is a traditional way to breed them. Separating the cocoons from the worms is a traditional way to grow larger ANC. Okay, that's good to know. I don't usually separate the worms from the cocoons. I use the lazy method. Yes, I use the lazy method of raising my worms. So I just put them all in their bins and feed the bin and maintain the bin. And when it's time to harvest, I harvest. But that's as far as I go. Maybe when I have a larger setup, then I will go that route. But for now, I'm going the lazy way. But yes, that's good to know that if you actually separate the cocoons from the worms, it helps you to have larger worms. Thanks for that. Yeah, so after you've worms from your harvested your castings, do you use them right away or do you blah blah blah? Yeah, so when you're harvesting your castings, do you harvest them when you just about the time when you're ready to use it, or do you harvest it when the casting is ready to be harvested? LP says, recently I had an outbreak of mites, so I decided just to harvest the whole bin. It was ready, okay, into a bucket and had a new bedding. Add new bedding to the bin. I've been taking castings, adding to water. Okay. Picking worms out as I go through it. Therefore, the mites are dying in water or going outside. Okay. Well, at least that method is working well for you, so that is good. So you put the worms in the water as well. Yes, because I don't really have a lot of time when I'm looking after my worms. So if for any reason worms end up in water, I try not to make my worms end up in water because sometimes when I'm looking after my worms, I just have 15 minutes or half an hour where I can run out, do something, come back and do something else, and then run out another time when I have a few minutes to spare. So I'm always afraid of my worms ending up in water because I don't know how long they're going to be surviving in the water without me aerating the water. So I'm always a bit afraid of them drowning because even if it is just one worm, I don't want it to die. So yes, I'm always afraid to get my bin in water. There are many times when I thought about using water to solve a lot of the problems that I might have in my worm bin that water can solve, but for that reason, I usually don't. Russell says they max out in weight, large or small, self populate. Okay, yeah. LP says back in the bin, things are fine. I've used maybe half the bucket of castings, so I'm using as needed. Okay. No, I pick the worms out as I find them. They keep going deeper. A few might wind up in the water. Okay, okay, gotcha, gotcha. Yeah. Um, LP says, I don't want them to die either, but I can only spend so much time picking them out. That is why I do a little at a time. I don't have a pump, so I just stir once a day and dump in the garden by day 3. Okay, cool. When I'm harvesting my castings, I like to harvest them like 6 weeks before I'm actually ready to use them if I'm harvesting castings to use in the garden. And if I have to harvest it like I'm going to be using it right away, then I try to pick out as many worms as I can. I try to pick out the cocoons as I can. But usually I try to harvest my worms 6 weeks or my casting 6 weeks before I'm ready to use it. And the reason that I try to harvest my castings 6 weeks before I'm ready to use it, whether I'm going to use it in my garden or I'm going to be selling it, is because I want to be able to get out all of those cocoons and hatchlings that are in there. So when I allow 6 weeks, then the chances are that most of the cocoons are going to be hatching because it usually take about 2 to 3 weeks for the cocoons to hatch. And then the other 3 weeks will allow the hatchlings to find their way to the bait or the food scraps that I've added to the bin. So that is why I like to allow 6 weeks, harvest 6 weeks in advance, and then I would have that extra 6 weeks now to get the hatchlings out. Let's see. LP says, at least I think that's what I've heard is okay if you are not going full on with worm tea. Okay, you harvest castings every Friday, Russell. Okay. I guess that's why you're always so busy when you're on the live on Fridays, eh? Let's see. And White says, I need to harvest my castings before winter. Okay, yes, that would be nice. Um, you don't have freezing temperature, do you, Han White? US says if you have 6 bins and harvest every 6 weeks, maybe do 1 bin a week. Okay. The thing with my bin, I think the biggest challenge to my bin is I always end up harvesting all my castings at the same time, which makes it a lot of work. And the reason for that is I always start my bins at the same time. So all my bins pretty much get started at the same time. So I'm usually just doing every couple of months, I just harvest one big harvest. Yes, but it would be nice if I can actually set it up where I have bins where I'm starting a few each week or each month. But then because I don't really have a lot of where place to store the castings, so it's advantageous when I start all the bins at the same time because then I just do a large harvest and store it because most people don't want castings until March, between March and September. So really to have a constant harvest throughout the rest of the time. If the bin needs to be harvested in between that time, then fine, I'll go ahead and harvest it. But all my bins usually get started. And then one of the reasons why all my bins tend to get started at the same time too is because I'm putting them outdoors in the summer. And then when I put them outdoors in the summer, they produce a lot more castings than when they are in the garage. And sometimes the amount of castings that they produce and the amount of worms, the rate at which they multiply, then I have to restart all the bins to find space to put all those worms. So that is one of the reasons why I usually end up with all my bins being started at the same time. So far, I've harvested 2 of my outdoor bins, and I have more than half of my bins that are indoors that have been harvested as well. And with that, I only have a few bins left that haven't been harvested indoors. I don't know where I'm going to find space because when I harvest castings from outdoors, it's usually a lot of unprocessed material plus the finished material plus the worms. So I have to have space to put all of those unprocessed material combined with the worms. Yeah, so that's part of the reason why all my bins get restarted because I have to find somewhere to put the worms and the finished material. I have, let's see, well, I'm not using 70 bins at the moment. I'm using 56 bins in the last couple months because I had 70 bins, but then I combined a lot of the bins after harvesting. So between those 56 bins, they all are going to be restarted in the next couple of weeks. Um, okay, you're saying no, you don't have freezing temperature and why? That's good. So you can store your castings outdoors. Yeah, I wish I could store mine outdoors or at least have sufficient space indoors to store them. Russell says, I shred bedding on Sundays. I mix worm bedding with water and chow every Monday, hatchlings on Thursdays. Whoa. So pretty much it sounds as if you have to tend to your worms on a daily basis. That's a lot of work, especially if you're someone who works away from home in addition to looking after your worms. Okay. Ashling's under the light. Okay. That sounds like a lot of work. I'm finding that these days it seems as if I'm gonna need to spend more time with my worm farm because when I was feeding them just finished compost, it was so simple. I just put the food scraps, the compost in the bin. I'm not adding bedding. Occasionally I'd put some bedding in there. And all I have to do is Mondays and Thursdays I'd go outside and wet down the bin and aerate the bin and that's it. until it's time to harvest the bin. But now I know I have to spend more time observing the worms, the rate at which they eat, where food scraps is concerned, because I don't want to be underfeeding them. And then I have to be monitoring now how much moisture the food scraps is producing in the bin. So it seems as if this time around, I'm going to need to spend far more time looking after the worms, which is okay. I don't mind doing that. Just have to reorganize my schedule, which is quite tricky because my schedule is always full anyway, but it's fun looking after the worms, so I'll work it out. And White says, we do sometimes. Last year we had freezing temperatures. Oh, okay. Fridays, transfer worms, collect cocoons, harvest castings. Quite a busy worm farmer you are, eh? Yes. But that's good. I'm sure the worms appreciate that. And I'm sure you appreciate the benefits that you are getting from doing so as well. Top feed daily all bins that are not breeding or growing. Oh, okay. I still don't have breeding bins. I don't know. I guess I wouldn't say it's lazy, but because I'm always so bombarded with things to do around the home in addition to work, so finding the time to do breeding bins apart from what I'm doing now is a bit tricky and time demanding. But it is something that I would like to do, but we'll see. It depends on what time allow. If I can simplify my activities, then I would definitely go that route. But we'll see at the end by the end of this year. I should know if it's possible to simplify all the things that I have to do. Okay, that helps them to grow to large size. Okay, cool, good. Yes, and I think one of the advantages of having breeding bins is that pretty much all your worms are at the same size in that particular bin. And if you're selling your worms, then that is pretty ideal because you know when that bin reach adulthood, so you don't have to be selling off your small worms and things like that. So that is one of the advantages of having breeding bins, and it is one of the reasons why I'm considering going that route. Yes, that's one of the reasons why I'm considering going that route. Okay, so when you harvest your castings, do you try to extract the cocoons and hatchlings that are in there, or do you just use the casting straight as is? With for those of you who may not be selling your worms, do you just use the casting as is, or do you try to get out whatever hatchlings or cocoons you can? I like to get them out. For more than one reasons. One, I do sell my worms, so I don't want to lose any, don't want to be putting them in the garden if I can have them producing in my bins. And then the next reason why I like to extract them is because if I put them in my garden, I know what the end result is going to be. They're going to die over the winter, and I don't want to have them dying off. Don't want them dying. And even though they're going to be producing cocoons and the cocoons can survive, why let them die when they could be populating my bin? Yeah, so those are some of the reasons why I try to harvest them from the castings. Okay, you try to get all you can. That's good and right. Yes, so what method, for those of you who try to separate your cocoons from your castings, what method do you use to separate the cocoons from the sifted castings. So far, the only method that I have that I can use is to unpick the cocoons that I can find. Sometimes it's not possible to go through all of the castings because it is a lot of castings. Like when I do one harvest of castings, I'm harvesting between 70 and 150 gallons of castings. So to go through all of that to find cocoons can be really, really tricky. So I hand pick when I see the cocoons, then I hand pick them, but to go through all of that to find it, no. So that is one of the reasons why I use the bait method, and do so over the 6 weeks period because it lessens the amount of work that I have to do. And then I was supposed to make a sifter for the cocoons for this summer, but then circumstances did not permit me to do so. So yes, hopefully by October I will get to make it and test it out to see if it works. Let's see. And why it says I need to restart my winter worm bin. Okay, yes. Well, I pretty much need to restart all my bins. I still have three. I still have three of the bins, outdoor bins that need to be harvested. I'm not looking forward to harvesting some of them. The ones that are compost bin that I had worms to, those are easier to harvest than the rest. And I guess maybe because I have a lot of cardboard over the tiered bin, so it's kind of make it a bit tricky to harvest them because the worms, the worms are in the cardboards, and I had a lot of cardboards covering the bin. One, because I'm trying to maintain the moisture, especially since as we were experiencing drought, and then to help keep them cool. And because I collected a lot of cardboard this year from one of my job sites, so I ended up with a lot of cardboards and I didn't have anywhere to store them. So I just opened them and put them over my worm bins. So now the worms are living inside all of those cardboards. So harvesting the worms from those bins can be pretty tricky because now I'm going to have to hand shred all of those cardboards in order to put that in the worm bin so that I don't lose the worms and the worms won't have to freeze outdoors. Yeah, so for those of you who have worm bins outdoors, worm bin that has to be brought indoors, how long do you have? How much longer can you let your worms stay outside before you bring them indoors? I only have 2 weeks before it actually starts. All being well, I have 2 weeks before it starts to get too cold for them to be outdoors. Usually, this time of year, with the exception of last year, by the end of August, I would have had all my worms indoors already. But last year, I was so busy collecting compost from the compost depot, it took me a whole month. And so last year, I started a little late with harvesting the worms outdoors. And I had to be harvesting all the way up until October. So hopefully this year I won't have to be there in October while it is cold harvesting my worms. So I have about roughly 2 weeks. I see where they're saying that even though the temperature is going to be 10 overnight, the lowest, it's going to feel like 7 degrees Celsius. So, and you know that once the temperature reach 5 degrees, the worms are going to be slowing down. At least they start slowing down once the temperature reach 10 degrees Celsius. So yes, when it reach 5, then they tend to go into an hibernative state. So definitely 2 weeks is the maximum that I have to bring them indoors. I wish it was simple where I could just scoop up everything into a container and bring them indoors. But then I have to be separating the worms from the castings. So that is why it takes a long time for me to actually process all of that material that is in the outdoor bins. But I think I will be able to get it done. Let's see. Oh, you actually leave them outdoors and they come back in spring. That's nice. Nice that you're able to do that. So they won't die off in the winter then, Russell. But that's nice that they actually. I know the cocoons will survive the winter, but the worms won't. Not in my region where temperatures can go as low as minus 60 degrees Celsius. Yeah, poor worms. Yeah, they definitely wouldn't manage that at all. I don't think even the Canadian night crawlers would be able to manage that. They have to be able to burrow down deep in order to escape the freezing temperatures. Speaking of which, I'd like to know how far down these Canadian night crawlers actually burrow down to protect themselves. So the ANC, Russell, you're saying that the ANC survived the winter in your region, but not their cocoons? Or are you saying that the ANC and their cocoons will not survive? LP says I don't pick cocoons out too much time. Yeah, it is definitely time consuming. The cocoons and the ANC will not survive. Okay, okay. Yes, because I was wondering about that because I know the ANCs are warm weather worms. Okay. Are you going crazy, child?
No,
You sure?
no.
You're not sure? Okay.
I'm sure that I'm not going crazy.
And you're here to play now that you hear me asking your sister if she's going crazy, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's not playtime now. You finish eating? What about you? Okay, good job.
Yeah.
Let's see. LP says, I don't mind my castings not being totally processed since they're just going into the garden, adding to organic matter. Yes, when you're just putting it in the garden, it doesn't really matter. Doesn't really matter because the only time it matters to me if it's going in the garden, if the worms are in there, because I don't really want to have the worms going into the garden. I don't mind having worms in there because I know that I have red wigglers in my garden because I do put some in there, some of them in there. And then once you put some in there initially, you won't be able to get all of them out. So I don't mind them being there as long as they can survive, but I don't want them. I would not really add more of the red wigglers to the garden because I don't want them to die out there. The European night crawlers, yes, those I would definitely put into the garden because they can burrow down and save themselves, but the red wigglers are surface dwellers, so they won't burrow down. So as soon as my European night crawler population gets bigger, then I'm going to be definitely putting some of them outdoors in all my raised beds and garden. It'll be fun to see what happens. So next year I'm going to be going through the garden because I released my Canadian night crawlers into quite a few of my raised beds. And then when we go fishing and if we have extra Canadian night crawlers, then then I will we usually put them into the garden and it would be interesting to see. I'm really hoping that I will start to see them in the garden, but so far I've never been fortunate enough to see them. Yes, the only time I've ever seen a Canadian nightcrawler in our garden was when I was relocating my kids' raised bed, and then underneath the raised bed I saw two of them. But beyond that, I've never been fortunate enough to see them. I don't know what. Maybe it's too hot, so they stay where they can't be seen because it's a lot cooler. I don't know. But it would be nice to see them and have an idea of what their population is like. Yeah, I don't really have to know how many of them are in the garden, but every now and then, if you come across one, then you know that okay, then the population is not too bad. But I'm not seeing any of them, and I've been putting them in the garden for years now. Every time we come back from fishing, so still haven't seen them. But time will tell. You are. Yes. So anyway, guys, if there are no other comments or questions, I'm going to be saying goodbye to you. Oh, you've got a quite of the Canadian nightcrawlers in your garden. Yes, I remember you sending me pictures and asking what type of worms they were. You don't like them. Um, why you don't like them? Um, Rosa says the ENC cocoons always hatch in the spring along with red wiggler cocoons. Sometimes the red wigglers unfreeze and start working right away. Sometimes unthaw to mush. I've never seen I never see frozen ENC. Okay. Yes, yes, it is amazing that the red wigglers, occasionally you will see some of them that actually survive the winter, because I've had that experience in 2019. I do, yes, after the freezing, I find that a few of them did survive. It was quite interesting to see. Yes, but I guess I would have to create a similar situation like I had in 2019 with that really high pile of food scraps. Yes, because it was so high and so wide that maybe they had places in there that they could actually overwinter and freeze, but then I guess it had enough heat, enough to keep them from dying. I'd like to see what happens with the European Nightcrawler when I release those in there. It will be interesting. Okay, you don't like them on white because they're too big. Yeah, imagine if they are growing naturally in your backyard, then it would mean that they are at home. So they're going to be growing to their full potential there. They're not confined to a bin. The ones we have here, as in the ones we get at the store, or the ones we raise in our bin, they are confined so they don't grow to their full potential. But I would really like to see the ones that you have there, to see them in person, what size they actually grow to. One day I might visit. I don't know when that's gonna be. Yeah, so I guess anyway, I'm gonna say goodbye to you guys. Thank you all for being here
Adios.
and hope to see you next week and that you will have a wonderful weekend. Stay safe. Remember, the vaccine doesn't offer 100% protection, so do your best to be safe. Um, they are longer and bigger than a pencil.
Oh,
Yeah, I know they can grow pretty big. They can grow up to 14 inches, so these Canadian night crawlers. Yes, I guess that's why they're called the granddaddies of worm. Also says the red stay on top, the ENC go into the soil. If they get down deep enough, the ENC returns to the surface in the spring. Oh, okay. My soil, the soil here in Saskatchewan freeze down to 15 feet in some areas. Some areas it's 8 feet. So it's quite a ways that the worms would actually have to go. Quite a ways that the worms would actually have to go in order to escape the freezing. But I guess if they go down in stages instead of just one attempt to go all the way down, then it would take them time. But if they go down in stages, then they can make it below the frost line. But yes, 15 feet is how far they would have to go. LP says, I had a worm survive in the garden last year. Have a great weekend. I'm doing errands, so half listening and chatting. I found another Asian jumping worm. Ooh, yeah. I hope you can get rid of them. Let's see. Russell says, I hope that worm does not cause you problem. Yes, it would be. And just one is what you need to actually have a large population of them in your garden. So hopefully you'll be able to catch them whenever you see them and remove them. At least help to reduce the population so that they don't decimate your garden and surrounding areas. Anyway, take care, guys. Thank you for your participation, and I hope all is well with you. And I will see you again on Monday. Okay, that's good. You got to kill that one.